Welcome to Reach for Healing. I'm Rebecca, and this is my mini masterclass number 2, the third and final session in the debt reduction and elimination series. I really just wanted to come to you today and have a chat with you over coffee. I've got my coffee here, and explain how I've used the processes, methods, and principles that I've shared in the first 2 parts of this mini masterclass number 2 to get myself into a much better position financially. And hopefully, when I share my experience, you'll be able to take some wisdom from that and apply it to your own circumstances and improve them as well. So in the first session of this mini masterclass number 2, I talked about some of the very common sense, if you will, steps that have to be taken. You have to organize your debts and know what you owe and how much you owe. And I suggested sorting them in order from biggest debt to smallest debt, and then looking at your circumstances. What options do you have? Is there money coming in from a tax refund or money that somebody owes you? Do you have a side job, or have you been talking with someone about the option of taking on a side job? Or have you even thought of a side job before? Maybe you should start thinking about what options there are for a side hustle. The other thing that I encouraged you to do is to identify the easiest debt to pay off first. Sometimes that's going to be the smallest debt that you have, but it won't always be. And you may remember that I used the example of if you have an $1,100 store credit card and it's not your smallest debt, but you have a $1,200 tax refund coming in, you might want to think about paying off that store credit card because of the big boost to your confidence, to your sense of accomplishment, and other things that would give you. So it doesn't matter whether you pay off the smallest debt you have or one that comes in like I gave the example. Just identify the easiest and quickest one for you to pay off. And then in the second step, we talked about Neville Goddard's technique of feeling and how we really need to use the setup that we did in our first session to visualize, and think about, daydream about what our life is going to be when those bills are paid off. And we talked about how Neville Goddard used that technique as he taught and in his life. And I shared with you that spiritual principles plus smart choices and personal action equals powerful manifesting. And I still believe that. And so this third session here in this mini masterclass number 2 is about me sharing with you how I feel that I have the legitimacy to come here and talk to you about reducing and eliminating your debt. So today I want to talk about student loans. I went into the military out of high school and did not have, there was a brief window of time between the end of the Vietnam War and the beginning of some other things where there was no automatic GI Bill. And that's when I was in the service. So when I got out of the service, I had a few skills, but no college money and no veteran status for getting any college money. And I was honorably discharged, so just in case you're wondering that. But there was a short period of time there where there was not a VA or a GI Bill like you would see today or like there was prior. So I was basically on my own to figure out how to get a job and things. And I was married and had small children. My marriage did not last, and I found myself a single mother with 2 small children and really very little ability to make money. I think I was making $5.60 an hour, which even back then wasn't very tenable. I went back to school immediately and was able to turn my financial situation in the short term around. But what I did was incurred a lot of student loan debt because I not only finished my bachelor's degree and then went to work, I also went back for a master's degree. And that was expensive. So I did get some help with that from my employer. A lot of times employers will give you a certain amount of money a year towards your tuition, but I ended up with over $70,000 in student loan debt. I went to a state-related university and a private university for my master's. So I invested well, and I have benefited from my education. And I've never regretted borrowing the money, and I've never regretted taking out those student loans, and I've never regretted going to school because the professional opportunities that I've had have been tremendous, and I would not have had those without the education that I got. So the first thing I want to share with you is don't be resentful about your debt. I have, through learning all these different spiritual principles and lessons, I have learned not to be resentful about anything. Resentment is a bad emotion. But really, when you're dealing with debt, you can start to feel resentful. And one thing that I've done with my student loan debt is never felt resentment. I have always felt deep gratitude for the education that I was able to receive, for the opportunities that that education has brought into my life, and for the doors that have been opened to me because of that education that was facilitated by those student loans. So I've never been angry or resentful of that debt. So that's the first thing. The second thing is I started looking at what I could do and rearrange some other things in my life. But the student loans, which were costing me $535 a month, was a significant monthly bill. And I began to think about how to use spiritual principles to get some assistance. Now, again, I was not trying to ditch my responsibility. I did not feel like I should default. That was never on my radar. I believed that I had borrowed that money in good faith and that it needed to be paid back. What I was looking for really was a miracle, a way for me to pay them back and still have that $535 a month in my budget. So I went to work using Neville Goddard's technique, and nothing happened right away. I say that a lot on this channel. Nothing happened right away. But what did happen a few weeks later is I was sitting in my office, or a short time later, I was sitting in my office at work, and one of my employees came in to chat, and he sat down and he was just talking. We were talking about work and some things going on, and he's much younger than I am. I was encouraging him to go back to school. And he made a mention of his fiance and said, oh, my fiance just signed, who also works at the same employer. She works in the same place that we do. And he mentioned to me that his fiance had just signed paperwork to stay with the company 3 more years because they were paying her student loans. And my ears perked up and my radar went, right? So I said, oh, what is that? And he explained the program to me. So we finished our chat and he left. And I immediately got on the phone with my boss and I said, I heard about this and I want more information. He said, oh, I forgot about that. That's a great, let me send you the paperwork. Long story short, in less than 2 months, I was no longer paying my student loan bills. They're still being paid. I signed a retention agreement with my employer and entered into a program that's very widespread in this particular organization. And my organization is paying my monthly student loans. This is how I have found time and again that these principles show up in my life and solve problems. Although at that point I was wise enough to know that it wasn't going to be the prize patrol knocking on my door with a check the size of my outstanding student loan debt, I think sometimes we still think in terms of, I need this amount of money to solve that problem. And time again, that's not how it shows up, but it shows up in a way that solves the problem. So for me, it was a win-win. I'm certainly going to still continue to work. And as I've shared in a couple videos, I enjoy my job and I like where I am. So that's not a problem at all. Number one. Number two, I said in, I think, the first session of this mini masterclass number 2, that this is not about avoiding responsibility. This is a responsibility-focused process of debt reduction and elimination. And number 3, it acknowledges that I did receive good for that debt. So that debt isn't a bad debt. It's a debt that I took on and that I benefited from. And so energetically, spiritually, in the universal order of things, for me to ditch that and to refuse to pay it would not be energetically aligned with the highest good for anybody. So I was committed to making sure that the bill was paid. I just wanted to have an easier month-to-month budget. So I'm happy to say that right now I am not out of my budget paying the $535 a month, but the bills are being paid. And that has put me in a much better financial position. And I have other stories to share, but I want to keep this short. And I think that this one is really one of the best examples of how spiritual principles show up in our lives to solve problems. I was able to stay open to how that would be solved. I was able to be patient. I was able to do what we say in divine science and in religious science. I was able to let it go. And in traditional religious circumstances, you'll hear people say, let go and let God. However you want to say it, it doesn't matter. But I trusted that the good in the universe was working in my favor. I continued to have good intentions for my creditors. And for this particular bill, I did not hold on to anything but gratitude. I was grateful for what those student loans brought into my life. And I worked the process of feeling how my life would feel when I no longer had to come up with a $535 payment every month. And feeling that and staying in alignment and relying on these spiritual principles that I know work is how I got someone else to pay my student loans. And I freed myself from $535 a month. I hope you'll watch sessions 1 and 2 in this mini masterclass number 2. If you haven't, subscribe to my channel because I'll have more stories like this one and like this video. If you have any questions, you can always shoot me an email. My website is linked in the comments here. So stop by my blog, check it out with more. There's more spiritual learning and support there and a way to reach out to me if you have questions. So until next time, stay in gratitude, keep the highest and best for all on your radar, and know that these principles work. Because as I said before, spiritual principles plus smart personal choices and actions equals powerful, powerful manifesting. And so it is.